Hello and welcome. I'm Helen Atkinson, Managing Editor at Supply Chain Brain. I'm excited to be moderating this webinar today, presented by Flex, the title for which is A Circular Economy. Later in the webinar, we're going to open up for a Q&A session with questions from you, the audience. Please submit questions at any time using the tab at the bottom of your screen. We will not be using people's titles or company names, so go ahead and ask anything you like. If you don't see your question come up during the webinar, please be assured Flex will reach out to you offline. But first, we're going to have a presentation from each of our speakers. After that, we'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll get into that Q&A session. Here's our topic, circular economy. We're going to get an update on the latest regulations related to the circular economy. We're also going to, we're also going to explore how those changes are shaping decisions by brands trying to achieve their environmental targets. Don't know where to start? We'll guide you through how to partner with a company that does. We'll also be digging into the details, including the benefits of compliance and how to track and analyze data to make sure things are going in the right direction. So let's meet our presenters. David Fitzsimons is Director of the European Remanufacturing Council. He is a member of the World Economic Forum's Advanced Manufacturing and Supply Chain Group. He's also a member of the United Nations Environment Programme on Product Life Extension and of the EU Circular Economy Stakeholders Platform. David also participates in the World Steel Association Working Group on Remanufacturing, which is the first materials organization to acknowledge the sustainability benefits of using durable materials in products designed for extended life cycles. We also have Xavier Hubert, who is head of circular economy at Flex. He has 25 years experience in the electronics industry's supply chain, from logistics and distribution to aftermarket services. For the past 10 years, Xavier has driven several circular economy initiatives supporting large tech companies' efforts to become more sustainable. He's also an expert on all the sustainability legislation that relates to circularity. Welcome, David and Xavier. So before we get to David and Xavier's presentations, we're going to do a little poll. Please answer this question. Has your company defined or implemented any circular economy plan? Yes, you've drafted one. Yes, it's under implementation, or no. Please go ahead and make your response. Give this a few more seconds while people answer. Okay, here we go. Here are the results. So we've got yes, drafted at 13%, yes, under implementation at 43%, and no at 45%. So that's a really interesting split. David and Xavier, any surprises there?
I think the first, I don't know if it's a surprise, but very, very pleased to see that more than half of the participants have already at least drafted, if not implemented, their circular economy plan. So very, very promising there. I think for those who answered no, I think hopefully you'll find that the next hour will be very useful and might tell you why it's a good idea to maybe start planning. And what benefit you might get from doing so.
David, what about you?
Oh, very good. Thanks, Xavier. And I agree. I think that's broadly what we would expect. It looks, this audience is much like many other audiences at the moment. So perfect.
Right. Well, it's great. It sounds like we've got at least half of the audience kind of at the beginning of the process and curious to learn more. I hope that we will be giving them plenty of meat to chew on. So I'm going to hand over to David to do your presentation. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Helen. Let me just, if I can just move on to the next slide. Well, look, I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you very much for the invitation from Flex. for me, it's a really good opportunity to work with, team up with Xavier Hubert from Flex, who I first met about, I don't know, 10 years ago when we were both participating at a Ellen MacArthur Foundation event on the circular economy. So here we are many years later, and I'm confident that the gaps in my knowledge that Xavier will be able to slip in and add the extra flavors to the sandwich if necessary. And maybe I can do some for him as well along the way. Let's find out. I've got 15 minutes, so let's crack on. I'm going to talk to you about three main topics. The first one, of course, is about the election results from the EU Parliament and the implications for the work programme beginning in November. Second thing, I'm going to give you a framework for how the Green Deal has been taken forward on many fronts during the last Parliament and how it's likely to be brought forward in the next Parliament. And then I'm going to dive into some detail on eco-design. And now we could easily get lost into that detail. So I'm going to try to just dive in, show you why it's complicated and why the Commission is particularly inviting voluntary agreements in the future. And I've put up the Antwerp Declaration on that slide as a little reminder of something that happened, which was a surprise before the election, which was that Alexander De Croo from the Belgian government, who were up to June, had the presidency of the EU, now with Hungary, set up the Antwerp Declaration through CEFIC, a trade association, to ask for industrial leadership on competitiveness to be the principal driving policy for the new parliament. And it attracted many, thousands of organizations, including our own at the European Remanufacturing Council, to support that as being a priority. And I think it's been so effective that I think it has swayed the direction of travel in the future. I'll come to that in just a moment. So let's talk about the European Parliament elections, which happened between the 6th and the 9th of June this year. The reason I want to just cover this is that the media has talked a great deal about the movement of votes towards what we call the right wing ideas, mostly nationalists who don't really support the EU project and who typically are looking for simpler answers to the questions being confronted by the Commission and the Parliament. And they've put a lot of effort into this. Media said a lot about it. So we've seen the creation of Patriots for Europe, for instance, on the right-hand side of this diagram. And that's quite right. There is a lot happening in changing the political direction for Europe in the future. And the energy is certainly moved to that right-wing area of policy. However, that can distract from what was the main story, which got much less coverage, which was that the EPP there in the centre with 188 seats really did hold the centre ground and has since worked with parties to the right and to the left, including the Greens and EFA, whose vote went from 70 seats to 53. But in spite of that, they have worked with the centre ground, and for the very first time, they declared that they would vote for Ursula von der Leyen to continue in her work for the Commission for the next 5 years. And as a result, at Strasbourg on the 18th of July, there was a publication which I'd strongly recommend those of you who are interested in this topic to read, which is Europe's Choice, authored principally by Ursula von der Leyen, sets out the political direction for the next 5 years. And I would describe that not as a shift to the right wing, as has been portrayed in the media, but really a parliament that has voted firmly for stability and consistency. So that document sets out what the direction will be, and it's principally this: more emphasis on competitiveness, but taking forward the Green Deal, which we'll talk about in a moment. Why competitiveness? Well, there's a major report about to be published by former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi that will set out why Europe must make competitiveness a more important issue, principally because Europe has fallen behind the United States, China, and India in growth rates, and that cannot continue. So that message has been well received. It's crucial that growth improves in Europe, and the way that it's intended to happen is by bringing forward the Green Deal and making it a more pragmatic way of driving economic growth in the future. Now, we could easily spend all 15 minutes talking about what's happening in the Parliament, but I won't do that. What I've given you here is a summary of the framework of the regulations that have been developed in the last Parliament, and indeed the Parliament before. And that's been led principally by this Green Deal, which has become a Green Deal industrial plan. But what is the Green Deal? What is it trying to deliver? Why is it so ambitious? Principally, by 2050, there should be no net emissions of greenhouse gases from the EU compared, so no, that's the target, no new net emissions. But a little bit like St. Augustine's prayer, if we were to update it, which would be something like, "Oh Lord, make me zero net emissions," but not just yet. 2050 is a long way in the future, and many organizations set targets that are 2050 and are criticized for doing so. Commission has got a target for 2030, 2040, and 2050. And the 2031 is to reduce emissions compared to 1990 by 55%. My view, that won't be achieved, but it won't be missed by such a large fraction as to call into question the purpose of these ambitious targets. And the reason why these targets are necessary is, of course, the number of molecules of CO2 in the atmosphere per cubic meter. Currently, I looked this morning, according to NASA, last month, 427 parts per million, currently about the same. And you can look up the daily figures. It's quite good fun if you're interested in it, just watching how it changes. What we mustn't do, what we don't want to do, is pass 450 parts per million. So it's like having on the dashboard of our daily lives a big dial that says this is what's happening. No matter what we do, if we're not changing the growth towards 450 as the dial goes up, then we're not being effective. It doesn't matter if we're setting targets for recycling or for remanufacturing or whatever. If we're not moving that dial, then we're going to run into serious problems. That's the reason for the target. That's the reason for the Green Deal. Now, having spent 300 years developing better law for the way we compete today, we've only spent 10 years trying to get circular economy regulations and Green Deal regulations to improve on that. And what does that mean? Well, firstly, you've got to change a lot of things. So my message to you would be, you might see progress in some areas getting stuck. Don't imagine that means progress is getting stuck, full stop, because you'll see progress leaping forward in some areas, in other areas not so much. So it's a very broad front. And what I've summarized here is to give you a sense of the extent of those changes. So for CSRD, for instance, most of you will be aware of this, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Why is that important? Principally because finance directors in all large organizations and medium-sized ones later will be signing documents that will give a public declaration of sustainability metrics so they're more comparable. There's a great effort on at the moment to make them more accurate, because finance directors are not accustomed to signing documents which have got error bars of plus or minus 15%. Xavier, I think, will highlight this later, that getting that data and doing it in a more accurate way is really important for the credibility of any efforts that are made around sustainability. Beneath that, there are many tools then for managing carbon. The EU's tools on what are called CBAM, which is a carbon adjustment mechanism at the border of the EU, encourages other countries to also have a carbon management system in place, rather than simply pay extra taxes into the EU for transferring, say, aluminium from China, say, into the EU. And sitting right behind the Green Deal Industrial Plan is the Circular Economy Action Plan from 2020. And there will be, in the new Parliament, a new Circular Economy Act. So do watch for how that is drafted in the next few years. I think it's likely to be very important as to what it focuses on and what it chooses not to focus on. But for the last Parliament, central to these to the regulations and changes has been eco-design. And the reason for that is that the Commission has been convinced of the research which says that about 75% of all of the environmental consequences from a product life cycle begins with the design of the product. So the Commission has really put a lot of effort into saying, in that case, let's address the design of products which are to be sold with a CE mark into the single market. And so the ESPR, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulations, yet more acronyms, ESPR was passed in June of this year at the end of the Belgian presidency. It covers about 11 main categories of products, but it will in the future cover many more through delegated acts. Quite a complicated area, but sitting beneath that, you'll see progress towards digital product passports, for instance, and watch also for green public procurement measures. On the other side of this framework, I've popped in the Right to Repair Directive as well as a demonstration of how really from the United States, the pressure to have a right to repair movement as part of the eco-design effort was very well received by the Parliament. I mean, the votes in favour of right to repair were almost unanimous. It was most unusual. And that's been passed now. There's a current review going on for end-of-life vehicle directives, end-of-life vehicle directive review, which is trying to marry together eco-design with end-of-life vehicles directive dating from 2008. So I'm quickly going to dive in to some eco-design detail. Printers and cartridges, a product area you'll be very familiar with. We all use them. And there was a voluntary agreement for this product area, but it collapsed when member states got fed up with the poor progress for the remanufacturing and refurbishment of both printers and cartridges. And because it wasn't delivering, instead, we've moved on to regulations. Well, the Commission has spent 2 years trying to understand in detail how printers and cartridges are made, the business models used, and the frustrations around why the figure isn't higher. So for remanufacturing and refurbishment. So there have been technical meetings going on. I've attended and participated in all of them. The last was on the 5th of July. My view is that the Commission are certainly going to draft regulations in relation to eco-design for this product category. It's likely to be a template for others, so well worth watching. But some of the ambitious things that have been written in the first text have now been dropped because they're just impractical. Drop tests for cartridges to make them more robust, for instance. There's been, and I think there is that the new Parliament is going to be more pragmatic rather than idealistic, which is where I think some of this work from the JRC in Seville has come from in the last year or so. So that's what's happening on the eco-design for printers and cartridges. I think it has implications elsewhere. There's a great deal more to come. Do not imagine that the Green Deal has gone away. Do not imagine that eco-design has gone away. The real move that will come with the Circular Economy Act next will be bringing more pragmatism to these regulations. And I think the big opportunity is to, if you can get 70% of the market together to bring forward voluntary eco-design regulations of your own, for your own product category, I think those would be particularly welcome. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to hand over to Xavier now, who I've no doubt will fill in many of the gaps I've left behind. Xavier, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. A very unique insight from Brussels. Thanks for that. And I think, as you said, the Green Deal, if anybody doubted that with the results of the last election, is far from dead, and a lot happening in the area of circular economy. Now, you mentioned regulation. Hard to argue with regulation. There's a need to comply, and it's the legislators' big stick to get people and companies to pay attention to a particular topic. I just wanted to take a step back and discuss elements. Companies have not been waiting for the legislator to wake up to embrace circular economy. They've been at it for for those who started early, over 10 years now, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and those reasons have also evolved, and I just wanted to take you through some of those. I think initially we saw the investors being the first in the starting blocks, and they wanted to understand how sustainable were the companies they invested in, and some of those are institutional investors like pension funds and so on, that wanted to invest in companies that might still be there in 30 years' time. And the companies started to satisfy that need for information and try to improve their ratings. And certainly no one's first circular KPIs looked necessarily great. So a bit of focus there in trying to address those. Now, what they've realized lately is that by doing so, they now have access to new type of funding. And if you've been following the last COP, which wasn't necessarily one to remember, but the big topic was how do we drive a lot more investments away from fossil fuel into those activities that are driving sustainability. And you did not mention taxonomy, which is another EU regulation that tries to understand where to invest, what is considered a green business, and basically that gives access to fresh funding, and that also gives access to preferential rates from banks and other financial institutions that are trying to support more sustainable business. Now, companies also got into circular economy because once they had tackled their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, for those that are familiar with the GHG protocol, those are the emissions that are directly emitted and directly under a company's control. When they started to look at addressing Scope 3, circular economy becomes a very great pathway and a very great tool to take some control over those purchased goods embedded carbon emission. Now, what they've discovered, having done so for a number of years, is that by tackling the emissions and tackling the waste and becoming more circular, suddenly it was not just the environmental targets that this strategy was helping, but also other sustainability targets like the governance and also social targets and biodiversity as a result of limiting the reliance on virgin materials and mining activities in particular. Now, you mentioned CSRD, David. This is obviously bringing sustainability disclosures into a mandatory type of landscape. Nobody wants to show 0% reuse or very high landfill or incineration volume, and it's going to be very transparent and very comparable. Very good reasons to tackle those. But I think what we're also seeing is for those that are doing well in those areas, for those that have been pioneering and really reducing those to the maximum, they have now something that will be very visible to the market. And not just the market. I think what we've seen lately is that, especially with Gen Z and the latest generation and the latest talents coming on board, and there is a lot of competition to attract that talent. They want to work for those companies that are doing well and that have all the data they need to make those informed decisions. Now, I think probably the highest on the radar of a lot of the companies we work with is simply meeting the evolving customer expectations. In the B2B space, this is basically increasing the ESG score, which is becoming something that has got a lot of weight in final decisions for RFQs. It's also being able to just supply product to, you mentioned that green procurement, which is part of the Eco-Design Directive. Not just the companies or organizations that are related to governments operate green procurement. There are new rules now for large organization, private organization, to procure non-new, and to be able to do that, you need to be producing non-new product in the first place. I think critical materials is certainly a growing topic. We've got a lot of geopolitical tension that are creating some unease with some procurement organization. Will they have access? It's not so much the rarity, but it's the access to those materials, and certainly being able to turn around the volumes that are already in your markets has a huge advantage there. We know legislation, whether it's in the US or in Europe, is also coming in relation to critical materials. It hasn't been voted on yet, but it won't be too long. And again, the companies that have started to work on those fronts have seen other benefits, which may be even higher than what they expected. All we needed was a COVID pandemic or a boat to get stuck in some canal to suddenly realize that the much shorter supply chain that is typically there in terms of circular supply chain is very helpful to react and being able to supply product in a period of disruption. The last point, I think you made it very well, David. Compliance is just not optional for any of the clients I work with. And again, complying for complying is certainly one thing, but it drives. If you don't wait for some of those legislation, you'll be better equipped to compete, but you're also future-proofing your business. And what we've seen in the last few years is that a lot of the risks that are being looked at by typically finance organization on that radar, a lot of the environmental risk are featuring higher and higher every year. So just a quick overview of other good reasons, including regulation, but other good reasons to move on to that circular economy journey. Now, more than the why, I should get onto the circular economy journey. I think the question I'm hearing the most at the moment is how I do that, and where do I start? First of all, I think I'd like to say there's no right or wrong. It's more sharing observation as to what we've seen, but I think there are some good reasons to consider it in that sequence. Often starts with life extension type strategy. Why is that? Because it enables the recirculation of embedded carbon, and really saving that impact of the initial production of the product. The nice thing with it is it also generate new revenue streams. Recertification programs. You expand the market. You can address. You can address the clients that are looking for more sustainable product, or the clients that are just looking for maybe those products at a lower price point, which you can potentially afford. In that case, and it offers also new insights into what does it take to turn those products around, and what could I do better in terms of my design if I wanted to make that easier or cheaper. Now, thing is, it has a limited impact in terms of the percentage of units sold that you might have put on the market, and this is where to increase those new revenue streams, you might want to be looking at returning some more units. We see trading being certainly a strategy that is used there to increase that. We are also seeing companies going as far as sourcing from the open market some of their own products to get them back and turn them around. Now, at that point, I think a lot of our clients realize they're producing potentially a bit more waste as a result of those operations, and the life extension hasn't necessarily addressed the waste. So we move on to materials recovery type of strategy, where the first strategy there is typically to try and reduce to a maximum the waste going into landfill. So zero waste to landfill type certifications are becoming a lot more relevant. And once the landfill is eliminated, now you can actually offer to your market to take back more product, because we don't really know what's happening in the market, and are those disposed the right way. How to dispose of it, and potentially at some point you also know how to get some of those materials back into your supply chain. And that's really where I think we're at the moment with those strategies is, how do I get back that material? It does two things to your supply chain. One, back to the eco-design directive again, it allows you to have access to recycled materials to have higher recycled content in your product. And what that does in turn is lower your product carbon footprint. It's also not bad for your reputation. At that point, you've really done all you could do with what you could put your hands on. It may still be a very limited percentage of what you've put on the market, and that's where a lot of our clients are now offering retained ownership type model. Think product as a service type model, where the user does not necessarily own the hardware, and that's certainly the most impactful in terms of reducing your own carbon inventory as a company, reducing waste and a lot of things. We see that as certainly taking off quite quickly in the B2B space. And if you add to that designed for environment, you see the return straight away because you own those products and you want to turn them as much as you can. You know, obviously don't become and don't change your business model overnight, and certainly when you're a business leader or a market leader, it's you know, it's a bit tough to change the way people have been consuming your product. However, I think we've seen in the tech industry, which I'm most familiar with, very big shift happening in not so many years. If you look at the software industry, for example, it used to be a once-off license you bought for the time you were using that software. I think most of us now are on a yearly or monthly subscription for most of the software. So it is happening. It is making your CFO very happy because suddenly you've got a stable revenue generation. As long as they got over the initial balance sheet challenges, I think you're in a good place. It is certainly making the head of sustainability very happy too, because that again is, I think, the type of strategy that is most impactful. Just to finish, and I think we might come back on that, but don't ignore data. I think more than cash, when you're getting onto that journey, data is king. You need to better understand what you're looking at. You need to quantify. You need to compare. And we're talking about different data than the financial data or product data that you might have been capturing so far. So we're talking about materials. What's in those materials? Are there substances of concern in those materials? What's the price of that feedstock when you get to the waste stage? What is the data in terms of weight? You know, a lot of companies track product, but do you know actually how much weight you receive, how much weight you send out to certain parts of the waste stream and so on? What is the impact of those? We pay attention to carbon, obviously, that's the main currency, but we also pay attention to water, we pay attention to energy, to waste. But there are about 25 different types of impact you can track, and I think you need to figure out pretty quickly the one that are most relevant to you. Bottom line, you need to know your data. You need to know your data to disclose and comply. And some of that will be third-party verified with CSRD. So no pressure there. You need that to take the right decision and prioritize those most impactful areas of your business. At the end of the day, you need that data to understand the return on invested equipment and on environmental investment. Sorry, is what I meant to say. So thank you very much for listening. I think I will leave it at that, and very happy to answer some questions at the end of this session. But I'll hand over back to Helen now for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, David and Xavier. I was really interested to see how the whole sustainability argument is moving away, in addition to recycling, towards durability and life extension of products and making less waste. I think that's really an interesting change in emphasis. So Xavier, I think listening to you and also David, we talked a lot about legislation coming out of the European Union, from the Green Deal to circularity and eco-design. It's tempting to think that the EU is way ahead of other countries, but that's not entirely true, is it? Could you tell us a bit about how big consumer countries, such as the US, and big manufacturing countries, such as China, have also been stepping up to the plate and even leading the way in circularity?
Yeah, no, good question. I'm conscious that there's probably quite a lot of people from the US or elsewhere outside of Europe listening today. First of all, I think I would say, yes, the EU has been very prolific, and David showed us a map there that is not even comprehensive, David. There's plenty more we could add there. So one could say Europe is leading the way, but they're not alone. And first of all, what Europe does has implications for global companies that are doing business in Europe. But the US has been very active too. I think we've seen quite a lot happening with the IRA package that passed a couple of years ago and really having impact and is being felt throughout the supply chain. David mentioned right to repair. The US again was first to the post there. I think it's California and New York and Minnesota, some of which became, I think, came into effect in June this year. In those states, for the products that are in scope, you have an obligation to provide the parts that a user might require, and you might need to do that for 5 to 7 years after you've manufactured that product. So it's being legislated in different ways, but I think the direction is clear. You mentioned China. China, I think, were the first one in 2008 with a legislation on promoting circular economy at different level of governments and in different areas of life. And we know that when those legislation in the country that is highly centralized in terms of government, those are typically followed very, very closely, and we've seen changes happening in that area too. So no, it's not just a European issue. Just to answer your question.
Right, great. But just to go back to the EU briefly, I mean, that European Green Deal that you were telling us about, David, it's pretty ambitious, reducing emissions by 40% by 2030. It's also going to be pretty expensive. So how will companies pay for meeting these requirements, David?
Yeah, okay, so trillions of euros of investment required to get there. I think McKinsey did a report to demonstrate how much. Look, in many respects, we don't have any choice. The real art to this is to make the next investment that any company makes a better investment in terms of carbon emissions and for the environment. So the really elegant regulation says, let's send a clear signal. If you're going to build a new plant, whatever you're going to buy, let's make sure that you decide to do the right thing rather than, some less efficient way, because we're going to be stuck with it for maybe 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 50 years in some cases. So that's what good policy looks like. The EU does not, because it's gone first, does not have any kind of a monopoly over making good policy. The competition around the world for good policy, I think, would be great for us to keep an eye on this. I think American policymakers are sometimes much smarter than European ones. Europeans tend to write lots and lots of regulations trying to get into the detail. So I think companies will have to pay, we all have to pay ultimately, but the art is to make sure we make the right decisions. That's what good policy looks like.
Right, good. So, Xavier, what's your perspective on that?
If I bring that back to the corporate level, I would say, circular economy does not necessarily mean costs. If you start with reuse, reduce, those measures typically have a direct line to your bottom line and save costs to start with. When you look at resell type of strategy on the life extension, products that used to go to waste are now being resold and create new revenue streams. So this actually has a top line impact. After that, when you get into materials recovery, things get a little more tricky, and there's certainly some initial investment to make. You're potentially dealing with products that you did not see coming back in the past, and there might be some extra cost there. But what we're starting to see is that extra cost is enabling access to a source of material, which is a very stable source, which does not follow the ups and downs the commodity market and all this, because it's your waste that you're transforming back into raw material. And that has a procurement advantage. So you might have a cost on the right hand, but on the left hand you get some of it back, and you've got that security of access. I think what we're seeing with product as a service is potentially considered as the holy grail there, because you're really decoupling your revenue generation from the need for materials. And there, depending on how clever your marketing strategy is, you have a very captive audience where you can leverage and use a lot of different strategies, like upgrade or bringing it back if it's no longer being used, and so on, and keep that revenue being meaningful to your clients. And I think there is money to be made.
Great, thank you, Xavier. David, let's talk about reuse and remanufactured equipment. As you say, that's a sort of developing trend. Do you think that you're going to see carbon metrics that recognize the value of reusing and remanufacturing equipment? And is it just a technology challenge, or do we need to change measurement processes?
Yeah, very good. A very good question. Look, we better is my view there, because at the moment there's lots of remanufacturing happening where the reward for saving 70–80% of the embedded carbon in a new product by having it remanufactured, the reward doesn't come through for companies that are doing that. So it's hard to do. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, have got metrics, CTI metrics, which do take account of remanufacturing, but they haven't themselves found a way of having a reliable measure to do that. But we need to get there. It's one of the many challenges that we have to do. And I think we'll get there, but it won't happen quickly. There's many things that will be happening in the next few years as well as that. Is that true? Do you feel like that's true, Xavier? What do you think?
No, absolutely. And it goes back to my point on data. Do you even know today, the product you're putting on the market today, how much of the content is recycled content? Do you know if tomorrow that minimum recycled content to be in a position to put a product on the EU market is let's say 20 or 30%, which are the numbers that are floating around at the moment? Do you know where you might find it, and in what part of your product you might have it? Because not every component might lend itself to recycled content. So I think getting on top of that data is critical.
Yeah, and the automotive sector are really troubled by that at the moment, aren't they? Trying to find out what their current rates are. It's amazing. I always ask that question, and usually people don't know. They don't even know who to ask to find out.
Wow, it sounds like a really important issue. We're going to move into our Q&A session now. Thank you so much, David and Xavier. We're going to bring the audience into this discussion with our Q&A session with questions from you, the audience. Once again, please submit your questions using the tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll not be using people's titles or company names, so you should ask whatever you like. And if you don't see your question answered during the webinar, please be assured the team from Flex will reach out to you offline. So let's get going with some of these questions. I'm curious about, here's an interesting one. Is it easier to be circular native? That is, you know, your startup that's got circularity up front and center. What are the top 3 challenges to transitioning from non-circular to circular? David, maybe you could go first.
Okay, I'll very briefly on this. This is a really good question. So a company wants to become more circular. And as Xavier asked, well, how do you do it? What's the first step? And my experience has been find the enthusiasts inside the company, the people who really believe in it. And often they're the youngest. They're not senior people, but they want to do it. Find them, work with them. You'll be surprised at what comes out. Ride with them, and you'd better do it, because if you don't, they're the people who are going to leave and become the startup that wants to come and eat your lunch. So I've seen it time and time again. A company that is receptive to that energy does something smart. I'll give you an example. Ralph Lauren. they had a tagging system for traceability in their clothes. And when they asked this smart group internally, they said, oh, we should use that system because our clothes, every time they get sold on secondary markets, they have to, you add value by certifying it's a real Ralph Lauren product. So they used an existing system in order to monetize it, to say, we can give you a certificate from Ralph Lauren to say you've got the real McCoy there. And that's all free money.
Yeah.
Ralph Lauren have already invested in the system. They're just adding a circular element to it, monetizing it. And there's loads to do like that in the circular economy when you put the right people in the room or speak to the right people like Xavier here.
It's a great question. I think I'll answer it simply. I think it's definitely easier for a startup and much easier for them to start circular than for a market leader to become circular. However, I think I would argue it's probably easier for the market leader to become circular than the startup to become market leader. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you. Here's a great question. What are the roadblocks that lie in the path of the circular economy? For example, is there a shortage of salvage companies to disassemble existing products to salvage parts? But what are some of the really practical roadblocks to this?
Did I mention data? I think I think it's
I
the
think you
first one.
did. Yes.
If you don't know what you're looking at, you can't solve for it. So that would be the first one. I'd say the next one is so there's no lack of goodwill. I agree with David there. You have that goodwill in the organization. You may not have the skills. And the skills you may not need to have them internally, but you need to reach out to your ecosystem. Companies that have sold products and forgotten about them for 50 years because this has been the business model, don't necessarily know what's happening to those products at the end of their life. So this is where I say, look at what you have and try and follow that and understand what's happening to it. As a first step, you start learning about, actually, there's a secondary market for my product.
Yeah.
Actually, there are people reusing some of the parts in other products. Actually, that iron is making its way into cars or could make its way into cars or potentially could come back to my suppliers. So I think the challenge is we don't know what we don't know. We don't necessarily have all the skills we need, but thankfully a lot of the new supply chain programs that are out there have got circular economy modules embedded within them, and we're seeing a lot of the younger people with not just an interest in that, but also some education and knowledge, which is very helpful. But I would say talk to your supply chain, talk to your competitors. They're trying to solve the same problem, and that's what we do at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that David mentioned. It's about pre-competitive type solution. Maybe there aren't enough people that can cater for the materials we have. How do we generate that new industry and maybe look at it as an industry?
Yeah, very good. Exactly.
That's fantastic. We've got a ton of questions. And so you guys are going to have your work cut out for you after this webinar is over, but I'm afraid we're running out the clock and we only have time for one final question. I'm going to pitch this to you, Xavier. We've talked a lot about different rules, regulations, metrics, strategies, but let's focus on getting started. If you're a business committed to adopting or exploring a circular approach, what's the first thing you should do?
Yeah, great question. I think back to the poll we had. If you're one of those 45% that haven't started, start now. I think would be my advice. You're gonna get caught by regulation if you don't, and there's plenty of opportunities if you do. Address what you already see returning to you today, and then learn and improve and maybe look for more. Learn from it, so you might design better your next product, and then prioritize once you have visibility to the data you've collected. prioritize that. You know, at the end of the day, you know, not to pitch there, but you know, when you're ready to scale, look for partners that might have done that before, and that might help you scale that, and partners that also will be, you know, will stay ahead of the ever-changing regulatory landscape, like David.
Great, thank you so much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you very much to David and Xavier, and a special thank you to you, the audience. Thank you for participating. Excuse me, I think we've learned a lot today about how to move forward with supply chain sustainability goals and by embracing circularity. We had a lot of questions today, and we'll be answering the ones we didn't get to with you offline. And those of you who registered for this webinar will receive an email later with a link to view the webinar on demand, which you can share with anyone. And there will also be contact information for Flex, of course. Thanks so much for your participation. Stay safe, stay happy, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.